The whispers followed her everywhere. At the market, at church, even at home. She's cursed, they would say. No children, no future. Her husband's betrayal stung like salt in an open wound. He left her for a younger woman, the promise of a family more important than the vows he had made. At just 16 years old, Ayodele was still a child, innocent, naive, and unaware of the darkness that would soon shatter her world. Her uncle, the one person she should have been able to trust, took everything from her in a moment of betrayal that would haunt her forever. It wasn't just the violence of the act, it was the way it shattered her perception of safety, of family. The weight of it crushed her from the inside out, leaving her silent and broken, not knowing how to voice the pain. When the truth came out, it wasn't the love or protection she needed that came rushing towards her. It was her father's shame. Mr. Bayo, a man known for his pride and his obsession with appearances, couldn't even look at his daughter without seeing the disgrace. His reaction wasn't one of anger at what had been done to her, nor a desire to seek justice. No, his anger was only for himself, for the damage done to the family's reputation. His first words were not to console her, but to hide the truth. He had no fight in him when it came to defending Ayodele against her uncle. No, the only fight in him came when the devastating news reached him. His own brother had gotten his daughter pregnant. In his mind, the only solution was not to protect or nurture his daughter's wounded heart, but to erase the problem. He couldn't bear the thought of scandal. His pride was everything. So instead of seeking justice or comforting his child, he took her to a quack doctor, a man who promised to fix the problem. He was more concerned with erasing the evidence of his brother's crime than with his daughter's well-being. The procedure, they told him, would take care of everything, but they didn't tell him how it would scar her, how it would break her in ways that even he couldn't understand. The doctor didn't care. He didn't care about the fear in Ayodele's eyes, nor the tears that slipped silently down her face. He only cared about the money. The procedure was painful, brutal, nothing like what they had promised. Ayodele's body fought against it, but there was nothing she could do. The bleeding began more than they had anticipated, and it didn't stop. Her body was betraying her, and her father stood there, emotionless, his focus only on avoiding the scandal, not on the life of his daughter. She bled for hours, losing so much of herself with every drop. When they finally realized what was happening, when the blood wouldn't stop, they rushed her to a medical center in the village, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. The doctors worked frantically trying to save her. When the doctor finally emerged from the operating room, his words pierced the air like a death sentence. Mr. Bayo, already distant and detached, didn't even flinch as the doctor looked him in the eye and delivered the crushing news. Your daughter Ayodele may never be able to bear children, the doctor said. The complications from the procedure has caused irreplaceable damage. She may never carry a child of her own. Mr. Bayo's reactions, nothing. He didn't even look at his own daughter. There was no sympathy, no sorrow, just cold indifference. For 2 years, Ayodele was kept in the dark. Her father never told her the truth about the damage done to her body, never told her that the brutal procedure had left her unable to bear children. He didn't want her to know. In his mind, the truth would only bring more shame to the family. Then, when Ayodele turned 18, her father made a decision. It wasn't one born out of love or even concern for her future. It was a decision born from a desire to erase the past. Ayodele's future had become a heavy burden to carry. So he arranged for her to marry a man from outside their town, a stranger, someone who didn't know her past, someone who would accept her without question, or so he hoped. The man he chose wasn't from their village, and that was enough for Mr. Bayo. He didn't care about the man's heart or his intentions. All he cared about was keeping up appearances, finding someone who could marry his daughter without knowing the shame she carried. Ayodele's feelings didn't matter. Her wishes didn't matter. She was just a daughter to be married off, a girl to be hidden away in a distant place, far from the whispers of the town. The wedding was simple, cold. Ayodele stood before a man she barely knew. her father's eyes never once meeting hers. The ceremony was more of a formality than a celebration. There was no joyful tears, no excited smiles, just a sense of duty as if she were an object to be passed on. When they left for her new home, a place she didn't know and would soon come to fear, Ayodele's heart was heavy. She didn't feel like a bride. She felt like a prisoner in a life she didn't choose. 5 years had passed since Ayodele was married to a man she hardly knew. His name was Tunde, a man whose life was as simple and unremarkable as the palm trees he tapped for a living. He came from a village far from hers, a place where life was slow, where people lived in small huts and the air always smelled of fresh palm wine and burning wood. Tunde wasn't educated, not in the way that others from the city were. He was a man of the earth, of tradition, someone who worked his hands raw every day, tapping palm trees to extract the sweet fermented sap. He didn't have grand ambitions, nor did he understand the complexities of the world beyond his village. When Ayodele was brought to him, he saw her as a woman to fulfill a role, not as a partner. He didn't know about the horrors that had shaped her life, the pain that had been forced upon her, the secrets she carried deep inside her. He wasn't interested in her past. To him, a wife was someone who kept the home, who bore children, who was there to serve, to fill a purpose that had been ingrained in him by the men of his village. Their life together was simple, routine, and void of the warmth that a marriage should have. Ayodele did her duties quietly as expected, and Tunde worked in the fields tapping palm wine, drinking it after a long day's work and occasionally bringing some back for her. There was no connection, no bond. They were two strangers living under the same roof, bound together by an arrangement neither had chosen. But over the years, there was a growing tension. Tunde became more and more frustrated, and Oyodele could feel the bitterness seeping into his actions. They were supposed to have children, weren't they? It was the unspoken expectation, the reason he had married her in the first place. Every month, he would ask with a hint of impatience, "When will we have children?" His voice was quiet, but it always carried an edge, one that cut deeper with each passing year. Tunde was patient, far more patient than Ayodele could have ever expected. 2 more years passed, with him quietly waiting for the miracle that would never come. Each month, the hope that this time would be different faded, and the bitterness in his eyes grew sharper. He had kept silence about the truth, about Ayodele's inability to bear children for years. Then, one evening, Tunde made a decision. It wasn't a sudden one, but rather the result of years of frustration that had built up like a dam ready to break. He told Ayodele that he was taking another wife. He never told Ayodele as though she had a choice in the first place or a say in the matter, and there was absolutely nothing Ayodele could do about it. Tunde was indifferent, as if this was simply the next logical step. He had already found a woman from the village, someone younger, someone who could give him what Ayodele couldn't. He even told her about Ayodele's situation, about her infertility, as if that somehow justified his decision. The new wife, Kemi, didn't waste any time. She arrived in their home with a sense of superiority, and Ayodele could see the smugness in her eyes. But what hurt more was how quickly Kemi turned Ayodele into the joke of their small village. She openly mocked her, calling her barren, a word that made Ayodele's heart shatter every time it was spoken aloud. But it wasn't just Kemi. She recruited her friends and other women in the village to join in the cruelty. They would whisper behind Ayodele's back, then laugh when she walked by. The mockery didn't stop at the village square. It followed her everywhere she went. "Look at the barren woman," they would say. "She's the one who couldn't even give her husband a single child. How sad." At night, when Tunde would lay beside his new wife, Ayodele would retreat to her new corner of the house, silent tears falling down her face. She was trapped in a marriage that had never been built on love, trapped in a life where she was nothing more than the punchline to a cruel joke. She was the woman who wouldn't have children, the woman who had been mocked, ridiculed, and abandoned by the very people who were supposed to protect her. Kemi, the new wife, wasted no time in claiming her place in the household. She quickly became pregnant with Tunde's child, the only thing Ayodele had been unable to give him. But her pregnancy, which should have been a symbol of joy for Tunde, only served as a new weapon in Kemi's cruel campaign against Ayodele. With a cold smile, Kemi began plotting her next move. She knew that Ayodele's position in the house was precarious. Tunde's patience was wearing thin, and she could see how the bitterness had started to fester between the two women. So Kemi played her cards carefully, setting a trap that would destroy Ayodele once and for all. One evening, while Tunde was out gathering palm sap, Kemi staged an argument with Ayodele. She started shouting at her, claiming that Ayodele was trying to harm her, trying to push her down to endanger her unborn child. There was no truth to the accusation. Ayodele had done nothing, but Kemi's shrill cries filled the house, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Kemi cried out in fear, accusing Ayodele of being jealous, of plotting against her, and of wanting to hurt her baby. By the time Tunde returned, the damage had been done. Kemi was in tears, her hands on her stomach, desperately pleading for her husband to believe her. And when Ayodele tried to explain, when she tried to speak the truth, Tunde only looked at her with disgust. "Are you trying to kill her?" he spat, his voice shaking with rage. "Are you so consumed with jealousy that you would harm her and my child?" Ayodele's heart shattered at that moment. She had been a woman trapped, silenced by the cruelty of her husband and his new wife. But now, she was accused of something so vile and unthinkable that even her own husband was willing to believe it. Tunde had always been blind to the truth of Ayodele's pain, but now his anger was aimed at her, and there was no mercy in his eyes. Without a word of explanation, without a second thought, Tunde shoved her out of the house. The finality of his action hit Ayodele harder than any accusation. He didn't care for her. He never had. "I don't want you here anymore," he said. "Get out." Ayodele stood there in shock, unable to comprehend what was happening. Her heart raced as she turned to face the home she had only once called her own. She had nothing left. She couldn't go back to her father. He had never accepted her. He would never take her in, not after everything that had happened, not after the shame she carried. She was alone. "Where will I go?" Ayodele asked, her voice small and desperate, but Tunde didn't care. He didn't even look back as he slammed the door, leaving her out in the cold with nowhere to turn and no one to help her. Ayodele wandered aimlessly through the darkened streets, her feet barely feeling the ground beneath her as her mind raced in a haze of shock and pain. The village was quiet, as if the world itself had forgotten she existed. She didn't know where she was going, didn't know what she could possibly do now. Hours passed, the night stretched on, cold and endless, and Ayodele didn't stop walking. She finally collapsed on the ground, her body giving in to the exhaustion. She had nowhere else to go and no one to turn to. But just as her vision blurred with tears, she could no longer hold back. She heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. Her heart skipped, fear flooding her senses. But when she looked up, she saw a figure tall, broad-shouldered, moving towards her. He was a hunter, a man whose face was withered by years of life in the wild. His hands calloused from working the land. His gaze softened as he saw her, kneeling down to her level. There was no judgment in his eyes, no disgust. "You are lost," he said. Ayodele didn't speak. She couldn't find the words, not at that moment. She just nodded, wiping her tear-streaked face with trembling hands. The hunter didn't ask any questions. He helped her to her feet and guided her through the dense forest, away from the village and into a quiet clearing. There, hidden from the world, he had a small, modest hut, simple and safe. Once inside, the hunter lit a small fire in the corner, its warmth spreading through the air. Ayodele sat down, her legs giving out beneath her as she finally allowed herself to rest. The hunter offered her a blanket, and she pulled it tightly around herself. He offered her something to eat afterwards, and Ayodele thanked him with so much gratitude in her eyes. "You can stay here for the night," he said quietly. The morning came too soon. Ayodele awoke with the quiet stirrings of the day outside the small hut. the sun breaking through the trees and casting gentle light across the room. She had no place in the world and no home to return to. She couldn't stay here forever. The hunter had been kind enough to give her shelter for one night, but it was only temporary. She gathered her things quietly, and just as she was about to leave, she heard the sound of footsteps. The hunter had returned, his presence filling the doorway. "Are you leaving?" he asked quietly, his tone filled with genuine concern. Ayodele froze. She hadn't expected him to return so soon. She had hoped for a moment she could slip away unnoticed. She didn't want to burden him with her pain. He had already done so much for her. But when she turned to look at him, something inside her cracked. The tears she had been holding back for so long, the ones that had burned in her chest all night, finally spilled over. Ayodele's body trembled as the sobs came, uncontrollable and raw. She sank to the floor, her hands pressed to her face as the weight of everything came rushing out. "I don't know where to go," she whispered through her tears, her voice breaking. "I have no one. I have nothing." The hunter knelt beside her, his presence is steady comfort. He didn't speak at first. He didn't have to. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her in the midst of her chaos. Ayodele let herself lean into it. "It's all right. You don't have to go anywhere just yet." Ayodele's sobs slowly began to quiet, her chest still heaving with the weight of her pain. After a long silence, Ayodele took a deep breath, her voice shaky but steady as she began to speak. Her words coming in a rush. She told him of all her ordeals and what she has been through. The hunter listened, his eyes never leaving her as she poured out her pain, the story of everything she had been through. When she finished, the hunter sat there quietly for a moment, his expression calm and thoughtful. Then in a voice that was gentle and firm, he spoke. "Stay here," he said. "Stay for as long as you need. I don't have much, but you are welcome here." Ayodele looked at him, disbelief and gratitude flooding her chest. The offer was unexpected, almost too good to be true. She had been cast out by everyone who was supposed to protect her. She didn't know what to say, but the words that finally came were simple. "Thank you." And for the first time in years, Ayodele felt like she might have a chance at a new beginning. As the days passed in the small hut, Ayodele began to find solace in a simple quiet routine. The weight of the world didn't disappear overnight, but the steady rhythm of life in the forest gave her a chance to breathe, to rebuild herself bit by bit. The hunter went about his daily work, and Ayodele, though still haunted by the memories of her past, began to feel something stir within her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: purpose. Her mother had always been a skilled herbalist, and Ayodele had learned the ways of plants and their healing properties from a young age. She had spent years sitting beside her mother, watching her carefully mix herbs, grinding leaves and roots to make remedies for common ailments. When Ayodele was younger, she had never thought much about it. It was just something her mother did, something she helped with when asked. Ayodele began to collect herbs from the forest, roots, leaves, flowers, anything that might help soothe pain, calm a fever, or cure a wound. She would mix her concoctions, carefully testing them, perfecting them. It was simple work, but it gave her something to focus on, something that made her feel useful again. She started small. At first, she made her mixtures and sold them to the neighboring villages. The money wasn't much, but it was enough to buy food, to make sure she had what she needed to take care of herself. The villagers were curious at first, unsure of the stranger who had settled in the hunter's hut. But when they saw the results of her herbal remedies, how they eased pain, healed cuts, or helped with common illnesses, they began to trust her. Word spread quickly, and soon Ayodele had a steady flow of customers who relied on her skill. One day, a woman from a nearby village came to her in desperation. Her son had fallen ill with a strange fever, one that no one in the village seemed to know how to treat. The boy had grown weaker with each passing day, and his mother was terrified she would lose him. "I've heard of your healing," the woman said, her eyes wide with worry. "Please, can you help him? Can you help my son?" Ayodele didn't hesitate. She took the woman's hands and gently guided her to the small table where she kept her herbs. With practiced hands, she mixed together a concoction, a mixture of herbs she knew would help calm the fever and boost the baby's strength. It was a delicate blend, but she had confidence in it. She had seen it work before. The woman watched in silence, her anxiety giving way to hope as Ayodele walked. After a few hours, Ayodele sent the woman back to her home with the mixture, instructing her to give it to her son as directed. The next day, the woman returned, her face bright with relief. "He's better," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "He's awake and talking. I thought we were going to lose him." Ayodele smiled, a warmth filling her chest. The joy she felt from helping someone, from making a real difference, was something she hadn't known in years. It was more than just the money. It was the knowledge that she had value, that she could offer something that mattered. The hunter had been quietly watching Ayodele's progress, and he was impressed. He had seen her work tirelessly over the past few months, making her herbal mixtures and selling them, helping the villagers and providing for herself. He had seen the way she handled her life with quiet strength, and it earned his respect. "You have a gift," he said one evening as they sat by the fire. "I can see it in the way you walk. You've helped a lot of people here and they trust you. You should keep going, Ayodele. You found something that not only helps others, but it's helping you too." Ayodele looked up at him, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and surprise. She hadn't expected anyone, especially the hunter, to notice what she was doing. She had thought of it as just surviving, but in his words, she realized it was something more, something that brought her back to life in a way that she hadn't anticipated. "Thank you," she said softly. "I didn't think I could do something like this, but now it feels like I found my place again." Word spread quickly through the surrounding villages. An illness had struck. A strange violent sickness, one that seemed to only target children, had begun to take hold of the village where Tunde and Kemi lived. The village that had once mocked Ayodele and cast her aside. The illness spread rapidly, its symptoms violent fevers, chills and rashes that quickly escalated into death. It didn't take long before the first signs of tragedy began to appear. Children once full of life were now pale and limp, their tiny bodies no match for the fever that burned within them. The elders of the village were helpless, there was no cure, no remedy, and the local healers were at a loss. The village was not modernized enough to have any proper medical facilities, and in desperation, the families turned to whatever they could find. But it wasn't until word reached the village from a neighboring settlement that they realized there was someone who might be able to help. A woman, they said, who had skills with herbs and had helped cure a sick child with a special remedy. This woman was known for her knowledge of plants and their healing properties. Her name was Ayodele. When the messenger from the village arrived, she knew who it was and where it was. It was Tunde's village, the place where she had been humiliated, mocked and cast aside. The thought of returning, of facing the people who had once shunned her, filled her with dread, but she couldn't ignore the urgency. Children were dying and they needed her. She packed her things quickly and left. When Ayodele arrived in the village, the air was thick with grief. The streets were quiet, the laughter of children replaced by the mournful wails of parents who had lost their little ones. And as she passed by familiar homes, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the past pressing down on her. The same village that had once called her barren, that had mocked her for not being able to bear children, was now looking to her for salvation. The women who had tormented her, those who had whispered behind her back, who had made her feel worthless, now stood with their heads hung low, their eyes hollow with sorrow of their own losses. They had lost their children to the same illness. Their homes were now silent, empty of the life they once cherished and mocked her for not having. But the most tragic sight of all was Tunde himself. He was standing at the door of his home, looking down at the lifeless body of his only child. The boy had been the light of his life, his only son, and now he was gone. It was too late for him, and there was nothing Ayodele could do to save him. As Ayodele walked tirelessly, mixing her herbal concoctions, treating the sick children and offering what little hope she could. Kemi, who was pregnant again, collapsed from the stress and the toll the illness had taken on her body. The grief and the loss of her child and the strain of the illness left her weak. Her body could no longer handle the burden, and she too lost the child she was carrying. Kemi's cries echoed in the house, her voice breaking with sorrow and pain. Ayodele helped as many as she could help in the village and was hugely rewarded by the king in the village. She was given so many gifts and even a place to stay. As Ayodele sat outside, exhausted from the long days of work, Tunde approached her. I never thought I would be standing here, asking for forgiveness, Tunde said. I never thought I'll be the one begging for your help. I was wrong about you, Ayodele. You've always been more than I gave you credit for. Ayodele didn't respond right away. She could see the sorrow in his eyes, but it wasn't enough to erase the years of pain he caused her. She didn't speak of forgiveness. She didn't know if she could forgive him. As time passed, Ayodele began to find a sense of peace that she had never known before. She had helped the villagers healing the sick, and while the wounds of her past still lingered, she no longer felt like she was defined by them. Her life with Hunter Ayo, though simple, had become a sanctuary. The quiet, steady rhythm of their days brought her comfort, and with each passing day, she healed in ways she hadn't expected. Even in the midst of the work she did for the village, Ayodele made time to visit the hunter. She could walk the familiar path through the forest to his small hut, carrying with her herbs he had gathered, or small gifts she had made for him, woven baskets, wild honey, or simple crafts. She always brought him something in return for the kindness he had shown her when she had nothing and no one left. The hunter in turn never failed to bring something to her doorstep, often a freshly caught piece of meat or some other gift from the forest. It was a gesture of his affection, one that spoke volumes without needing words. Though they said little to each other, the small exchanges of care built something beautiful between them. One morning, as Ayodele sat, the hunter approached her with a proposal she hadn't anticipated. Her voice was steady, but his eyes spoke of something deeper. Ayodele, he said, I've come to care for you deeply. Will you be my wife? Ayodele's heart skipped. She had never imagined herself in this position. After everything she had gone through, after the years of rejection, the pain and loneliness she faced from both the people that were supposed to love and protect her and from her husband. Yes, she said softly. Yes, I will. I will be your wife. The hunter smiled, and in that moment, Ayodele knew that her life had finally come full cycle. She had found love, not in the way she had once imagined, but in a way far more real and lasting. When they married, it felt like a rebirth for Ayodele. A year later, Ayodele's life took another unexpected turn. She discovered that she was pregnant. The joy that filled her heart was unlike anything she had ever known. She had never believed that she could have children, not after the trauma of her past, not after everything she had been through. But the herbs and roots she started taking for fertility had worked. And then, as the months passed, Ayodele's shock turned to ill. When the time came for her to give birth, she delivered not one, but 3 babies, triplets. She had never imagined it. It was a miracle, something she couldn't have dreamt of. The hunter stood by her side, his eyes filled with pride and love as they gazed at their children. It was a moment of pure joy, a moment that had seemed impossible not so long ago. But as life moved forward for Ayodele, Kemi's story came to an end. The weight of her losses, her children, the heartbreak of seeing Tunde's indifference and the sickness that had ravaged her had broken her spirit. She died quietly. And Tunde, left with no family, no future, was forced to face the consequences of his own choices. His world had crumbled. He had lost his son, his unborn baby, his second wife, and everything he had once valued. In the end, Ayodele found peace. She had built a life for herself, one far richer than she had ever imagined. She was no longer the woman they called barren. Moral of the story: no matter how broken or discarded you may feel, there is always the possibility of healing, growth, and new beginnings. Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. If you enjoyed the story and want to see more, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more powerful tales like this.